in me, lying on the concrete, there's a knee against my neck, pleading for my breath, pleading for my breath. There'll be no peace, there'll be no peace, there'll be no peace until there's justice, until there's justice. There'll be no peace, there'll be no peace until there's justice.
Well, thank you. I want to thank our reflection leaders, Nekima, Levy, Armstrong, and Cheryl Persigehl. Thank you very much for being our reflection leaders this evening. And we want to dedicate a little more time to share this reflection time with you. So our breakout time will be a little shorter this evening than our normal procedure. So we're so thankful to have with us Nekima Levy Armstrong, who's a civil rights attorney, activist, national expert on racial justice, former law professor and legal scholar. She previously served as professor of law at the University of St. Thomas and law school for 13 years, where she founded and directed the Community Justice Project, an award-winning civil rights legal clinic. Nekima is the executive director of the Wayfinder Foundation, which provides support for women of color activists and organizers around the country. And Nekima is also the founder of the Racial Justice Network, a grassroots organization that organizes and leads protests and demonstrations, provides community outreach and resources, and challenges injustices within systems that impact Black people and other people of color in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities. Nekima's work has been featured on OprahDaily.com, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Associated Press, NPR, Crisis Magazine, Huffington Post, Minnesota Post, and Star Tribune, to name a few. She's appeared on CNN, BET, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, PBS, Democracy Now!, Al Jazeera America, News One, and Huffington Post Live. And maybe even more importantly, she's been a voice in our community, for so many voices that are so often not heard and whose valuable lives not seen. Cheryl Persigehl is a lifelong Lutheran and anti-racist activist on the journey, an organizational effectiveness consultant. Cheryl has worked as an independent consultant, a facilitator, a coach with executives and teams of for-profit and not-for-profit sectors for the past 26 years in her consulting practice. Cheryl assists clients in developing courageous, resilient leaders, navigating change, unpredictability, and the unknown, and building coping skills in high-stress, complex environments. She holds an MBA degree from the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and liberal arts degree from St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. And Cheryl lives and works in South Minneapolis and is grateful for the opportunity to share this abundant life with the Global Village and her husband, Jonathan, their daughters, Chloe and Justine, and their pets, Daisy, Snuggles, and Stripe. And we're so thankful to have Nekima, you, and Cheryl this evening, and look forward to our time and the conversation together. Yeah. So can we ask, maybe begin with, how did you come to know each other?
So one, I want to thank you guys for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you for all of your work in the community, Pastor Kelly. I've had a chance to fellowship with you all, and it's been a blessing every time. So I would say Cheryl is really a godsend from my perspective. I met her back in probably 2016, early 2017, when I was running for mayor of Minneapolis. And for those who may not remember, I ran on a police accountability and racial justice and equity platform. And so some of the folks who were attracted to my campaign were not only Black folks and people of color, but white folks who care about the current conditions and issues that impact our community and who want to see a change. And so Cheryl was one of those individuals who heard me speak and who hosted one of my campaign events at her home. She invited all of her friends. And from there, she just started, working towards justice and being a part of the unfolding work and trying to encourage others to do the same. We're both women of faith as well. And I feel that that connection really helps drive our connection, just being led spiritually in the work that we do. And the other thing that I've seen with regard to Cheryl is that she's a tough woman. She's not Minnesota nice. She's willing to speak the truth and let the chips fall where they may. So she's a woman after my own heart in that regard.
Oh, wow. So I have to say, Nekima and I have not rehearsed this conversation at all. So each time we speak, it's going to be news to the other. So thank you, Nekima, for that's your very kind. I remember, I can remember exactly the moment that I first heard Nekima speak when she was campaigning for mayor. I want to back up a little bit from there, though, and I don't know if I've even told you this, Nekima, but the first time I saw you in person was at a vigil after Philando was killed. And you and Marquise, your husband, were there, and some other Black leaders kind of convening the vigil, and it was at Loring Park. And I was so upset at that point. I hadn't really been active in, like on the ground active. And I thought, I am going to go to this. This is just unacceptable. And I just remember how moved I was by when you spoke, telling the truth, naming the horrific crime that had been committed against Philando. And people were very upset. Many people were really, really struggling emotionally. And I remember how you and Marquise were able to hold all that energy and help people both, be in the moment and also not spin out. I was just so moved by that. And then when I came to hear you speak, I was all in. So.
Nekima, how did you come to Minnesota? You can share it.
Honestly, I still wonder that because it is so cold, and no offense to anyone, but it's very white compared to places that I've lived in. But honestly, I feel that God orchestrated my move to Minnesota, although I was not aware that was what was happening. So just to make a long story short, right out of law school, I went to work for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law in Washington, D.C. While I was there, I got a call from a former law professor about coming back to my alma mater, which was the University of Illinois Law School in Champaign-Urbana, to come and teach for a year. And so the person who hired me was the dean of the law school, Tom Mingler, who I was actually the last person that he hired before he became the dean of St. Thomas Law School. And so he reached out to me during my professorship to let me know about St. Thomas and to encourage me to apply for a position there, which I did. And I was hired to run a family law clinic back in 2003. I was in my 20s, and I had been told, how Minnesota is such a great place to live. great place to raise my family. Our distressed communities aren't so distressed. And this is what a law professor at a different institution had told me about Minnesota. And that's what I believed for my first couple years. And then when I started picking up the Black newspapers and putting down the strip, that's when I started to see the truth of what was really happening here, but had not really come to the surface. And so, after that, I just said, I need to do something to begin to address these issues. And so I reached out to a man named Nathaniel Kalik, who's an elder in St. Paul. His family was one of the last families to be forced out of the Rondo community. And he was the St. Paul NAACP president at the time. And so I reached out to him, asked him if we could have coffee so we could talk about what was happening to Black folks in this community. We talked for about 4 hours over coffee. After that time, I just knew that I needed to switch from family law and focus on civil rights. So I said, I'm gonna start a civil rights clinic and we're going to help you fight, on behalf of the Black community. And that was probably in 05, 06. And one of our early issues that we took on was policing, specifically looking at the St. Paul police and this gang database and things like that happened here. Mm-hmm. So that's how I got here to teach at St. Thomas. And then because I was in my 20s, I just said, I can still do other things outside of an academic institution. Most of my colleagues were 40 plus. So I decided as I was getting closer to 40 that I was going to run for mayor. And even if I didn't win, I was going to stay out of academia and continue standing up and fighting and advocating and just using the skill set, that I have to fight. And so I've been here, ever since that time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to give Cheryl a different question about how did you get here? As a white woman, how did you get here in terms of relating out of more than being white? How did, moving beyond maybe the guilt, blame, and shame into an authentic relationship that transcends the boundary of race?
Wow. That's a really okay. Well, just the point of context. So I grew up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And when I grew up there, it was very white and very insulated white. Literally there was one Black student in our high school. And so I really, when you think about, original imprint from our original family and our original, cultural systems, I was completely clueless about race, racism, any of that. And over time just became aware of injustice but I think, I have to say, I was a nice, what I would call a nice white liberal for about the first 20 years of my, first 30 years of my adult life, thinking I was doing all the right stuff and not really getting it. And for me now, the reason that I'm so invested and that I really want to speak out, and I really, working with Nekima and earning her trust and, being part of her work is so important to me. This is about my liberation. This is about me breaking the shackles of white supremacy on my soul and my spirit and my vitality. This is not altruism for me at all. This is not benevolence. This is not, the traditional sort of churchy way of thinking about justice, what I would call the traditional. This is about my life is at stake here. My spirit, my soul, my experience of God.
I want to thank you both again for for entering into this conversation. And I'm throwing questions at you that you didn't know beforehand. So thank you again for that. But I'm wondering, what do you expect of each other? And in terms of the relationship that you have, what do you expect of each other? What makes it work for you?
I would say authenticity makes it work for me in terms of our connection and our relationship. Like, I've always felt comfortable with Cheryl from the time that I met her. And she just talked about her commitment to racial justice and wanting to do this work. And I think the test sometimes can come, like if someone, say, is running for office, right? And I ran, I didn't win. Cheryl could have just gone back to, business as usual, not having to help take on the responsibility of this fight, because it does take a toll. It can be stressful at times. It requires a lot out of people, and most people just opt not to participate because it is a heavy price to pay. But to have someone seeing that I did not win my election, but who cares about the underlying reason why I ran and knows that there's a lot of work to do and that they have skills and ideas and just being a woman of faith to contribute has been powerful and very affirming. So that's, my perspective on how and why this works, and just seeing Cheryl willing to put some skin in the game, because you have some people, their definition of putting skin in the game is putting up a Black Lives Matter sign in their yard or their window. But when it comes to being willing to stand in the gap and take the hits and be uncomfortable, most people, unfortunately, are not willing to do that, because again, it definitely takes a toll. So I've watched Cheryl roll up her sleeves and go into very difficult situations and stand her ground for what she believes in. And also for her to follow the leadership of Black women. I'm one of several Black women who Cheryl works with and who she provides support for. And I see how she uses her privilege and her contacts and her connections to help bring resources to our community, to help carry out whatever the vision is that a Black woman has who's in the trenches doing the work. And to do that with a sense of dignity and grace and responsibility, right? Not from a place of entitlement, but really intentionally leveraging her privilege to bring about change. And there's a lot that Cheryl does and that we do that most people don't see, right? Because what people tend to focus on is when they see something around policing. That gets the most attention for whatever reason. But a lot of our day-to-day boots on the ground work does not really directly involve policing, right? So when it comes to talking about education and organizing people to show up at school board meetings, that's something Cheryl has been heavily involved in, writing op-eds to provide a counter narrative to this deficit-based mindset that exists around Black children and their capability. And even during the pandemic, one of our community partners, TT Bidiako, who runs We Win Institute, I had reached out to her to say, what are the needs of the Black families and children that you work with, whose education is being disrupted, whose income is being impacted by the pandemic? And she said, they need food and kids need books, and things like that. And so Cheryl was one of the people who stepped up to help organize a full-scale operation, delivering meals to families without any red tape, delivering books and resources to children, putting on events, and then getting to the point where people have started going into their own pockets to help fund this grassroots operation, and then helping to connect TT and We Win Institute to a broader organization that was able to get a lot more food and pulling in volunteers. So they used the basement of Zion Baptist Church to bag groceries, for these families. And that helped sustain quite a number of Black families during the pandemic. And it gave children hope because they would receive books by Black authors. So that's work that does not get attention, but that Cheryl has been very heavily involved in helping to organize, that she does, you know, in the spare time. I don't know how she does it, but again, working alongside of Black women and listening to Black women, which I think is just very powerful. And that's an authentic way to engage in the work, whether people see it or they don't, whether cameras are on or it's not, whether it's popular or it's not, that gets done behind the scenes.
I'm sure that that's a reciprocal relationship. And so what do you get out of that? What?
Oh my, so much. So I think before I answer that, just because this has been such a school of life experience for me, and, you know, to re-educate and unwind so much that is a barrier to this kind of thing happening between Nekima and me. That's in our culture, that's inside of me. You know, just to unwind enough to, first of all, and this sounds like, especially because I think most people on this call consider themselves liberal or progressive, but I honestly think the first step that we need to take is to literally challenge ourselves to believe Black leaders, to believe what they say, to believe their truth, to believe what they are asking for. And, you know, we can say as white liberals, oh, well, of course, you know, I'm all for that, you know, let's end the injustice and let's do this and do that. But then we spend so much time debating, rationalizing, deflecting, and working around. And, you know, what it comes down to is, you know, what I had to come to terms with in myself is that I didn't know how to believe Black people. I didn't know how to believe what they were saying was true, you know, unequivocally, without any defenses, without any, you know, trying to rearrange the narrative in my head. And so for me, what has been such a gift is to be in relationship with Nekima and Titilayo and Nafisa and Chantel and Satara and so many others who have let me figure that out. You've let me figure that out, and you've let me do the hard work of stumbling into how to be helpful and how to really follow, what that looks like, what that feels like. And because it is like, for a white person, that's like the left shoe on the right foot. It is so, I mean, we have to just be honest about this, folks. You know, nobody taught us how to do this, and this is not the flip of a switch. And I am so grateful that the spark of inspiration and the great that I felt in meeting Nekima, and then the amazing grace and welcome that she provides when people are willing to do their own work, right? When people are willing to do that, and believe me, my own work is going to be mine until I take my last breath. This is not, there's going to be no matriculation. There's going to be no graduation. I'm going to be doing this till my last breath. So what I expect from her, what is so important to me, is that she will hold me accountable to that work, right? That she'll hold me accountable, not just to like showing up and being hands-on and following, when I'm asked to do, and stepping up when I'm asked to do, and being bold when I'm asked to be bold. But she'll hold me accountable to what's happening on the inside for me. This can't be performative, and that's a conundrum for white people, because we are programmed to be performative. So that is a tricky, sticky wicket. But you just have to keep at it. You have to keep humble. I have to keep humbling myself. I have to keep humbling myself day after day after day, and get over my shit, and get over my my confusion, and get over my programming to be in charge, and to think I know how this all works. I just feel so grateful that you trust me enough to let me do that in real time, and tell me when I need to take it somewhere else. Really.
Listening to you, there's a book, Scott Peck wrote a book called People of the Lie. And so much so, but I think racism is a lie. And so to extricate oneself from that identity around racism, is to move beyond the lie. And both of you talked about authentic relationship. So when I asked the question about benefit, the benefit of being authentically who we are, and not through the lens of racism, but as children of God. And so I hear that in your relationship with one another. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if there are questions you have each other. Selfishly, I have a question of you, Nekima. And seeing you with your daughter reminded me of this. At the press conference, when you were talking to the mayor and this acting police chief, you spoke with such power and passion and love. And where does that come from? That reservoir, when you speak that way, can you speak to, I just was sitting there wondering, how do you do that? Where do you get the courage? And seeing you with your daughter kind of told me where the courage comes from. Maybe you both can speak to that, or I'm going to get out of the way and let you talk.
Well, thank you for that question. I'm sure a lot of people have that question who saw the press conference, but I'll just to backtrack a little bit and help people understand the context for the situation. Number one, I had no idea that the mayor was even having a press conference at that time. Literally, I was following the leading of the Spirit of God through that whole process. So I had been on the phone talking to other organizers, and literally earlier that day, and we said, we're going to hold a press conference that early evening at City Hall. We just randomly chose a place, so we said City Hall, we'll be there at 5, and we're going to continue putting this case out there so that people can see what really happened and care, about Amir Locke, and care about this call to ban no-knock warrants to help save other people's lives and them from having to go through this kind of unnecessary tragedy. And so that was our decision. So when we showed up at City Hall, I was walking into the building and got word that they were going to release the body camera footage later that evening. So that was another surprise. So after our press conference, we waited around at City Hall. We said, let's just watch it together. It's very difficult watching those kinds of videos, right? I definitely don't want to call them films, but it feels like a snuff film when you're literally seeing someone be executed right in front of you. And it's better to not, if you are going to watch it, to not watch it alone. And so the activists and organizers who stuck around, we just said, let's watch it together. So we did when it came out. We saw the video on our phones and we were outraged. We felt sick. We felt sad. And then we were able to go into someone's office and watch it on a computer screen. Because I'm like, well, maybe I missed something. So we went back and looked on a computer screen and we were even more upset. And then we found out that the mayor was having a press conference down the hall. And I'm like, oh, are we going? Everybody said yes. I'm like, okay, well, let's go. And during that time, I'm on the phone and I'm praying, right? Before the press conference started, just asking God for direction and instruction. And also just trying to grapple with my own emotions and feelings about what was happening in that moment, to Amir Locke, to his family, just the whole situation. And so we sat in the back during that whole press conference and we just listened to what they had to say. We didn't have a plan, nothing. We just listened. And so then when it was time for questions to be asked, there were reporters and activists both asking really good questions. Normally, it's activists having to sneak into press conferences and having to sneak in questions that reporters typically are not going to ask of the elected officials. But this time, the media was actually asking excellent questions along with activists. And so I just got the urge to just get up and just start documenting what was happening. So I pulled out my phone, went on Facebook Live. And as I'm listening, just in my spirit, I just felt like I needed to go up there and I needed to confront what I felt was a cover up, what I felt was an injustice that was happening in real time, instead of staying in the back and remaining silent and then regretting, not having done anything to intervene or trying to talk about it later. Like, this is actually a moment right now to stand up for what I believe in and to speak the truth. And I didn't know what was gonna come out of my mouth or anything. I just prayed and went up there. And literally I had to go through two people. One was a reporter who, once I made the decision to walk up, a reporter had started asking a question. So I had to say, hold on. I have something to say. As I took another step, then that's when, I don't know if this person is retired MPD, current MPD, security. I just know it was an older white man with a big gun who was standing against the wall and telling me to stop, stop walking. At that point, I had made a decision. I knew that's what God called me to do. Nothing was going to stop me. So the man could have tackled me. He could have done whatever. At that point, I didn't care. I just was a willing vessel. I went up there and spoke just what God gave me in that moment. I didn't know how it was going to come out. It was just raw. It was just, just saying what needed to be said in such a critical moment. And I'm glad that I did. I know some people may not like any kind of disruption. And I would say then, for those who claim to follow Christ, I question that, because Christ was a disruptor of the status quo, of business as usual. When people were shunned in our community, that's who he went and ministered to. That's who he laid hands on. Nobody was too dirty. Nobody was too bad, too negative, too whatever for Jesus to go and disrupt social norms, societal norms, and to level the playing field on behalf of those who were shunned. And so as a woman of faith, sometimes God calls you to do things in unexpected ways that might surprise people. But as a follower of Christ, as a woman led by the Spirit, I've had enough experience with God to go when he says go, to say when he says to say something, and to do when he says to do. So that's what people witnessed in that moment. And I think it was the power of God and seeing that range of emotions, yet the strength, that captivated people and made them want to know what happened in that situation. But I cannot take any credit for any of that. I just give all glory to God for using me as a vessel in that moment. And I thank God that my spirit was ready to go and do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and when I went back after, I was just like, I was bawling. Like literally, Jaylani, who's saying from CARE, he had to embrace me as I just had tears, just Like I was just weeping and weeping and weeping, right? Which is more evidence of just being used by the Spirit as a vessel in that moment. But the parent in me as well, thinking about my son, thinking about that Amir was somebody's son, and how easily these things can happen, and how the public can listen to the official narrative and then tune out with regard to the truth.
Mhm.
That's what we do over and over and over again. We have these pivotal moments where maybe there's a trial, maybe there's a conviction, maybe there's an uprising. And then people just go right on back to business as usual until the next thing happens. That is a terrible cycle that we have to break. And our expectation needs to be justice, accountability, overhauling and transformation of systems that are oppressing people.
Mhm.
Not comfort and then being scared and calling on God when people are afraid. You know, by that point, God is like, okay, pray now with your feet. What are you going to do?
Mhm.
And I think that's the question that we need to be asking right now.
Thank you.
And can I say something, Kelly?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that powerful clarity that you just heard from Nekima, that deeply spiritual confidence and truth is so much a part of what feeds me in this work. And I, when I talk about, this is deeply spiritual work for me. This is, I think, I agree with Nekima that any of us who call ourselves Christian, and I call myself Christian, any of us who call ourselves Christian, if we are not in this fight in the name of Jesus, then what are we doing? What are we doing? There is nothing more central to the gospel than justice and liberation and dignity and safety and care for our brothers and sisters. White folks, we have been walking way too long with the Sadducees and Pharisees. I mean, really, that's who we are in this play, in this story. And if we don't get that, and if we don't unwind ourselves from that, then we're, again, it goes back to our own liberation. We are bound up like tight wrapped, unable to move spiritually if we can't embrace that truth, and how incredibly uncomfortable and scary and confusing that feels. And I'm so grateful to Nekima for being in my life, God's presence and that witness. I mean, that's what she has activated in me. And then to be open to that it's not just, this is what happens from afar, that we literally walk together, we pray together, we pray for each other, we stand in the gap together, whatever it is, we hand out groceries, that this is together, that we are together in this. And I'm so humbled by that, because this has been your fight for a lifetime, and I am so late to the party. I am so late to the party, and yet you said, come.
That's what Jesus says to all of us, right? No matter how late we are to the party, he extends grace and an open invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it is just never too late for people to be open and willing.
Well, thank you. I just have one last question. When can we have you back?
Honestly, whenever I'm willing to come back. I'm sure Cheryl is as well. You know, this is an important part of the work, right? Connecting with people who might be looking from the outside, who want to know what's happening on the inside. And this is an opportunity to share that, right? In a way that you normally cannot in a public sphere. So I appreciate this space that you all have created and that you took time tonight to be a part of this conversation, not knowing what would happen or what you would hear, but the fact that you signed on, you got involved, that's a huge step forward. So I'm willing to come back whenever the invitation is extended.
Well, how about you, Cheryl?
I'm here. I come every month, so I'll be back and happy to talk about it. You know, the other thing I think, you know, I would love, can I ask Nekima a question?
Yeah, I think we do one more question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Nekima, what, you know, I've tried to describe what I think this is about for me as a white person working through all my crap and, you know, all of that. What do white people need to know who want to be in relationship with Black people, in authentic relationship? What do they need to know from you?
Well, I think the first question that they probably need to ask themselves is why, right? So that you try to eliminate if people are fetishizing Black folks and other people of color just to say, I have a Black friend, you know, or to use that person as a buffer or as your personal teacher when they just want to live their lives. So I think the first question is why. And I think people should approach it in terms of wanting to do justice, wanting to stand up, wanting to advocate and use your voice in service to God and to see what He has called each person to do in that situation. And I just believe that given the richness and the level of diversity here in the Twin Cities, that actually reflects what the kingdom of God really looks like. And so if we approach it from that perspective, you are going to naturally gravitate towards like-minded people. And like-minded people are not always based on skin color. It may be based on the heart. It may be based on a desire to stand up or for change, or you see people suffering and you have compassion. And so I think if people have that kind of heart when they are approaching Black people or other people of color, then there can and will be a connection that is formed. But I think it's also realizing not everyone wants that, not everyone is ready for that, because some people have been so wounded by white people, particularly in this community. And some of the woundedness might not be from a direct thing that someone has done. Maybe it's their indifference to the plight of Black folks, to our pleas for justice, to our cries for help, and seeing those cries fall on deaf ears. So I think if people have an open and a willing heart, you're going to naturally gravitate towards people. When you're in a workplace and you see there's only one Black person or a small number of people of color, just being open and available, you know, listening, walking in humility. And if folks ask for your support, advocating for them. If you have an opportunity to be proactive and bring an issue to management that, you know, is concerning to Black folks, to people of color, then do that. Use your privilege and your power. Don't just sit on the sidelines and let it happen, or be part of a group that isolates Black people and other people of color in the workplace, which we hear that happens all the time. And I think that Pastor Chatman's church is another example of what the beloved community looks like. You know, a racially diverse, socioeconomically diverse ministry where people come together and try to grapple with some of these issues, and right in the heart of the community.
Well, thank you both so much. I don't know when I've smiled as much as I've smiled this last hour. And this is a good time for us to transition into the breakouts, where it's an opportunity to practice much of what we've been, you've shared this evening. And so as the guidelines for the breakouts, to introduce yourselves to one another, we have about 20 minutes total. Focus on listening well, listen with your heart. hear from each person in your group. You may choose one of the questions that's presented and speak from your own experience using I statements. The questions that we would invite you to consider in your breakout is what stirred you in this conversation? Where did you hear from more than white voices? And what's your call to action in building deeper relationship with someone in your life who doesn't look like you? So invite you to take a moment. Maybe we can take a question or two from the participants, for Nekima and Cheryl, while we prepare to enter into the breakouts. Does someone want to ask a question?
Richard has his hand up.
Oh.
Richard.
Richard needs to be unmuted. Richard, you're still muted.
I just unmute. Okay, there we go. So I wanted to say, thank you, Nekima and Cheryl, for really showing us what I would say racialized beloved community looks like, in real time. And so my question is actually for Cheryl. One of the things that I've had some experiences, with Cheryl is really utilizing, her power and racialized privilege in organizational structures. And so could you talk about, how you utilize your power, in the boardroom, so to speak, in the meeting room? I think Nekima just spoke about that. And really also where you are in your life and how you're modeling for others that you look like on this call who may think that they can't make a difference, but really inviting them and encourage them to not only get in the street, but, your actions in the boardroom too.
Wow. Can I think about that and talk about it after break? How about that? Thank you, Richard. It's good to hear your voice.
Yep, shout out.
Are we prepared to go into breakouts now?
I think prepared as we're going to be.
Okay.
I see my light come shining from the west now to the east. Any day now, any day now.
Welcome back, everyone. Cheryl, do you want to, and Nekima, you want to take a moment to maybe answer Richard's question? We have just maybe 2 minutes before we transition. So.
Yeah, well, I really want to give the time to Nekima. We talked during break, and I think it's really important. I want to hear from her.
Well, I want to hear from Cheryl answering Richard's question, only because he posed it directly to you. I think that Richard, I'm guessing he's a Black man, but I think that that's important just to respond from your perspective, because I think he wants it to be a teachable moment for other white folks in terms of knowing how to show up in spaces of power and to do what you do, like unapologetically as a white woman.
Yeah. So I'll be as brief as I can. I think that the first thing is to get really centered in my own trust in myself and in my liberation. That this is every choice I make is about my spiritual path and about my bringing God and goodness into the world. At its best, not always perfectly, but at its best, that's what it's about. And if I get centered on that, then fear has no place for me. Now, diplomacy is still important sometimes, right? But the short version answer to the question is that I tell the truth. I think the truth is the best and most powerful tool we have. And if you just start with the facts, I mean, certainly there's a lot of story and there's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of opinion around all that we are struggling with as a human community right now. And there are so many facts that are clear and compelling. And if we just point each other towards the facts, I think, without flinching and without, rationalizing, and the facts as it relates to injustice and justice, right? The facts around that. And then to say, I believe Black women. I believe Black leaders. That's it. This is where we're at right now. That I believe them, and that's why I'm in this fight. And to invite other people to just, consider, what if we started from that place? What if we started from believing the facts and believing the experience of Black people when they tell us what's true for them? What if we simply just started there? And then saw what else could open up. So that's an oversimplified version of what I try to do. And then to say that I'm a white woman, and I have a tremendous privilege, and this is cheap grace that I don't want to accept.
Well, again, Cheryl, Nekima, thank you very much. And just a reminder to everybody that this takes practice. Everything that you heard, there are patterns. So practice doing the advice that what you heard tonight, put it into practice. Make it daily. Maybe they say one step at a time.